Good Tuesday morning. I'm Dasha Burns. Joe and Savannah have the morning off. Well deserved. Right now on Morning News Now, blizzard of the century. This morning, emergency crews are still scrambling to rescue people in western New York stranded under mountains of snow, left behind by what's being called a once-in-a-lifetime winter storm. The snow is still not letting up, creating challenges for the thousands trapped at home. More than 24 people are dead in the Buffalo region alone, and officials warn that number could rise. We have the latest on the conditions in western New York, plus how people are helping their neighbors and total strangers to make it through. Hitting the road. Today, millions of people will be driving home after the Christmas holiday. What to expect in what AAA is calling one of the busiest travel days of the year for drivers. Plus, the latest on the situation with Southwest Airlines after they canceled more than 2/3 of their flights Monday, leaving passengers stranded across the country. Also this morning, masking up. Some states are considering a return to mask mandates as COVID cases rise. We've got an update on the new surge and how you can protect yourself. Plus, a serious shortage of cold medicine for kids. What you should do if your child gets sick this season. And people of 2022. There's a lot of stories from 2022 we'll never forget, and that includes the Florida man with no flying experience who had to land a plane after the pilot had a medical emergency. We'll check in with him later this hour on how that experience changed his life. We begin with the latest on those deadly winter storms. Several states across the country remain buried under snow, and in others, even more is on the way. In hard-hit Buffalo, New York area, a region familiar with heavy snowfall, dozens of deaths have been blamed on what's being called a once-in-a-lifetime blizzard. The National Guard is already assisting New Yorkers, while the White House says the federal government is ready to come to the state's aid, too.
We have been through a lot of wars together, and this blizzard is the one for the ages. Certainly it is the blizzard of the century. I was at the Buffalo Police Garage talking to them personally about their experiences. They're grieving inside, as we all are, for the families who are getting the horrible, heartbreaking news that their loved ones succumbed to the storm over the last day or two.
Meanwhile, the post-Christmas travel rush is turning into a nightmare for thousands of flyers. The aftermath of this winter storm resulting in thousands of delayed or canceled flights. And a significant number of those flights were on Southwest after the airline canceled more than 70% of its scheduled flights yesterday. We have full coverage this morning. NBC News reporter Gary Grumbach will have the latest on the conditions on the road on one of the busiest highway travel days of the year. Meteorologist Andy Lassman is keeping an eye on the next round of snow. And we'll talk to the general manager of a restaurant, which became a makeshift shelter to those stranded by the storm. But we begin with NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch in Rochester, New York.
Yeah. Good morning. Might be trying to dig out here, but we've got more snow coming down right now, and you can see just some of what has been pushed aside and piled up behind me here right next to the airport here in Buffalo. That airport is going to stay closed at least until Wednesday morning, and you can see, at least in part, why. This area has been battered by this brutal cold and this blizzard-like conditions that we've been dealing with in terms of a broad stretch of the country seeing bad winter weather throughout the past few days across the holiday weekend. Here in Buffalo, they got more than 4 feet of snow. Officials in the area blaming the weather for more than 24 deaths, and several more deaths nationally have been attributed to the bad weather that we have been seeing. There is more bad weather on the way being experienced in the Pacific Northwest. The South and Midwest are looking at a warm up. We're also hopefully going to see some warmer temperatures back here in Buffalo in the days ahead, but clearly still a lot of cleanup ahead for this community that has been hit so hard by what is being called a historic and devastating storm. Back to you.
Wow, Jesse, just incredible. Thank you so much. We're joined now by Joe Bratt. He's the general manager of the Alabama Hotel Restaurant in a small community northeast of Buffalo. Joe, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Now, Joe, contrary to its name, the Alabama Hotel is not, in fact, a hotel. It's a restaurant. But you turned your restaurant into a makeshift shelter for dozens of people who were stranded by the storm. How did you come to that decision, and what's it been like for those who have stayed at your business?
Gosh, it was actually an easy decision. I was here Friday morning. We were scheduled to be open, and we determined that we were not going to be open. We contacted our employees. I left to go home Friday about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't make it a quarter of a mile. I turned around and I came back. And no sooner did I unlock the back door, the folks were knocking on the front door. So what started with a couple of stranded motorists quickly, by the end of the day, turned into, somewhere around 115 that stayed that first night.
Wow, 115. That's just incredible. Talk to us about your personal experience with the storm. We've been saying throughout our coverage that this area is not new to these snowstorms, not new to cold weather, but I've been hearing from a lot of folks that this is unlike anything they've ever seen. What have you experienced there?
At 45 years old, this is nothing like we've ever seen. The wind, the amount of snow was just unbelievable. I mean, you couldn't see across the street. Nothing like we've ever seen before. Nothing like anybody that I've encountered over the past few days has ever seen before.
Joe, every time I cover a tragedy, some sort of natural disaster, it never ceases to amaze me how much light you can find in the dark. Talk to me about how you've seen neighbors, helping strangers. How have folks contributed to your effort as well?
So neighbors, right across the street, we have the Alabama Holly Farms, Craig Alexander and family, just trudging back and forth through the snow to bring us food. I was the only employee in the restaurant at the time. We were not scheduled to be here. Neighbors, Brian Katarski, right here by my side for the whole 2 days, 48 hours. Neighbors trudging through the snow, pulling sleds, bringing us blankets, bringing us air mattresses, bringing diapers for the babies. Neighbors making sure that the children that were here had Christmas presents to wake up to on Christmas morning. Unbelievable sight in how this community pulls together.
Yeah, I mean, to have this kind of storm, this kind of disaster over the holiday, but you guys are a little bit of a Christmas miracle over there. So what's next for you? What's next for the restaurant? Are there still any folks needing help there? Have you been able to dig out from this thing?
We are good. Bonnie Woodward, the owner here of the Alabama Hotel, she makes a decision every year to close between Christmas Eve and just a couple of days into the new year to give her employees a break. So we're going to take that break, and I think that break is a little bit more deserved this year. Yeah, I guess it's buckle up and get ready. There's a lot of things that we learned from this experience, and I think that we can do good things by adding a couple more, totes of items to use in case of emergency upstairs and in the basement, and just be better prepared. But we did the best with what we had, and you know what? At the end of the day, we served 120 people prime rib dinner on Christmas Eve. So it's just an amazing experience.
Yeah, and a much needed break for you and your team next. Please take care of yourself, Joe. Thank you so much. Thank you for being that light in the dark for the community.
Thank you.
Time now for a check of your morning news now weather. For those of you making that treacherous commute home this morning, meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us now. Good morning, Angie. Lay it on us.
Good morning, Dasha. And things have improved in a lot of places, especially parts of the Deep South, but Buffalo continues to still be dealing with snow. You heard Jesse talking about it. Those lake effect snow bands have been persistent. They have not let up. And just to put it in perspective, this was a community that saw more than 72 hours of prolonged, continuous lake effect snow, and not to mention 37 hours rather of blizzard conditions. So this is eventually over the next 24 hours going to start to wind down. Likely here by the time we get to the evening hours tonight, we'll see better conditions and improvement and a warm up for folks in Buffalo too. But now we turn our attention to the West Coast, where we know we've had travel trouble all across the country. This is the area that I think we're going to have to monitor for the airports. We continue to see torrential rain working onshore with a system that's bringing plenty of moisture to folks folks from Seattle through Portland down into Medford, San Francisco, and as far south as San Diego. Folks in Los Angeles and San Diego are going to get in on some of this very much needed rain, and most of California too. But with that comes the concern for flooding as we get through the next couple of days. And here's why. We have an atmospheric river that's just pumping in plenty of moisture. That's basically a highway for a lot of moisture to make it near shore and onshore. And you can see from San Francisco down to San Diego, that is where we will be monitoring for really an active weather pattern as far as flooding concerns and snowfall is concerned. Here's what we're expecting. A couple of inches along the coast, but again, we have those burn scar areas that cannot handle the flash flooding, or the heavy rainfall, and results in flash flooding rather. So just be mindful of that. As we look towards the Rockies and even the Sierras, we could be talking about a foot to 3 feet of snow. That's one aspect of the weather that we're monitoring. Of course, that impacts the airport, so keep that in mind as you go through the next couple of days, because another weekend of holiday activities is upon us. And again, that focus is mainly to the West Coast for difficulties when it comes to the airport. But the good news is we also have a warm up on the way, Dasha, and that means places like Buffalo, they're going to see temperatures in the 50s, and that will eventually leave us with some melting going on there. Now, one thing to note, it is good for cleanup, but it could also result in some minor flooding for people there. You see by Friday, they'll see temperatures into the low 50s.
And it has just been relentless for holiday travelers.
It has. And if you're planning on, coming to Times Square to watch the ball drop, it'll be warm into the 50s, but you also have to pack your rain gear.
Pack your rain gear, pack your snow gear, pack your
gloves,
hand warmers, everything. It's just been nonstop, Angie. Thank you so much. All right, Southwest Airlines canceled nearly 3,000 flights on Monday, leaving passengers stranded across dozens of airports in the U.S. According to CEO Bob Jordan, delays and cancellations will continue over the next couple of days. The company plans to operate with just over a third of its schedule to sort out the so-called meltdown. But passengers not so willing to be patient, expressing their outrage on social media. Many reported customer service wait times were over 5 hours long. My goodness. And online support was non-responsive. It's unclear when new bookings will be available. The Department of Transportation says it will be investigating the airline's breakdown. The winter weather isn't just affecting air travel this year. Millions of people are expected to hit the roads today during that post-holiday rush, making a return to pre-pandemic numbers, according to AAA. This is the busiest travel day for drivers during the holiday season, only second to December 23rd. But snow and ice could cause major headaches for travelers looking to get home. NBC News reporter Gary Grumbach joins us now from Maryland House Travel Plaza in Aberdeen, Maryland, with more. Gary,
Hey there, Dasha. Yeah, airports have been a mess, as you just mentioned. Roads, for the most part, have not been, but that may be all about to change. On my drive up from D.C. to Maryland this morning, you could tell there were more cars on the road than usual, and that's because, as you mentioned, this is one of the busiest days to travel, as 113 million people are expected to take to the roads this holiday season. 90% of them are going to be driving, and that's perhaps a higher number even than that because of the mess we've seen at the airport. So folks say just pack your patience. That is something we say all the time. It certainly applies in this situation as well.
Right, Gary. I mean, considering last week's winter storm impacting drivers, when can we see the roads actually clear at this point?
So roads, for the most part, on the East Coast, as you just heard from the weather report, central part of the country, southern part of the country, roads are pretty good in that case. Up in Buffalo, out in Denver, out west, that is where we still see some concerns. But AAA has some tips if you're hitting any of these roads. They include check the air pressure, especially with how cold it is outside across the country. The air pressure in your tires really matters. Also, if you're on some of these treacherous roads, as easy and as convenient as it is to use cruise control, don't do that, because you can go slipping and sliding all over the place. Dasha.
Gary, with the driving tips, we all need those. I got to ask before I let you go, the thing that's been on everyone's minds for most of this year, gas prices. What are we seeing at the pump? Should drivers be bracing for higher gas prices before they hit the road?
Yeah, this is the good news part of the report here. This is the cheapest gas prices we have seen in more than a year and a half today. National average of about $3.10, as you see right there on your screen. Behind me here, it's $3.19, so a little bit above national average. But across the country, the highest prices you're going to see are out west in California and Nevada. But things are really looking good for gas prices around the country as people fill up their pumps.
All right, a little bit of good news in the midst of such a mess out there. Gary, thank you so much. Now to Washington State, where officials are investigating a number of attacks on electrical power stations. They're worried it may be the latest in a series of attacks on the nation's power grid. NBC News' Tom Costello has more.
It happened early Christmas morning. 3 power substations in the Tacoma area targeted and vandalized. Another on Christmas night. Arriving officers found blue flames, the perimeter fence cut. In all, 14,000 people left without power. Amanda Clark lost electricity and her well water.
Scary in our small little community that something like that would happen.
We're going to be investigating to see if this was coordinated by a specific group of people.
The FBI issued a warning this month after power companies in Oregon and southern Washington were attacked using hand tools, arson, firearms, and metal chains, possibly in response to an online call for attacks on critical infrastructure. In North Carolina, substations were attacked with gunfire, knocking out power to 45,000 homes and businesses. A Homeland Security terrorism advisory warned in November that domestic actors and foreign terrorist organizations maintain a visible presence online to motivate supporters to conduct attacks in the homeland.
The FBI seems concerned that domestic terrorism is encouraging this online. What's the motivation?
They're looking for chaos and destabilization because they believe the government is oppressive. They believe the government is what keeps everything going, and they don't like the way things are going.
Homeland Security is increasingly concerned that the electric grid is vulnerable, targeted by domestic extremists motivated by election anger, the Capitol insurrection, Nazi ideology, socio-political issues, and encouraging each other, feeding on this online. Back to you.
Tom Costello, thank you very much. Now to the growing humanitarian crisis on the southern border, where thousands of migrants are seeking shelter from dangerously cold temperatures while facing a very uncertain future. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock is on the ground.
El Paso overwhelmed with migrants battling bureaucracy and bone-chilling cold. Venezuelan Luis Soler says he's not accustomed to temperatures in the 20s. Many staying warm in churches over Christmas, connected through song, but also pain. Others were left outside, like this little boy with just a few blankets. We've come for a better life, he said. At this El Paso Convention Center, there's 1,000 beds inside, refuge for some, but only for those migrants who have the proper paperwork. The chaos against the backdrop of an unprecedented number of undocumented immigrant crossings at the southwest border in fiscal year 2022, 2.76 million, putting a massive burden on states like Texas. Buses leaving there and dropping families off in freezing temperatures outside Vice President Kamala Harris's D.C. home on Christmas Eve. The White House calling it a shameful stunt, a spokesperson for Governor Abbott countering the migrants had agreed to go. With the COVID-era Title 42 allowing for the expulsion of many asylum seekers still in limbo, charities are picking up migrants along the southern border and taking them to shelters across the country, shelters already stretched thin, and right now with no solutions in sight.
Our thanks to Sam Brock for that report. Temperatures in El Paso are expected to rebound the next several days, climbing back up to the 60s. And turning now to the triple threat that's plaguing hospitals nationwide, RSV and flu cases appear to have reached their peak as COVID infections spike. The recent uptick has some states considering whether they should now bring back mask mandates. Joining us now to discuss is NBC News medical fellow, Dr. Akshay Sayal. Dr. Sayal, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, mask mandates. It feels like we're living back in 2020 again, but could mask mandates help, especially if we're seeing these statistics? New CDC numbers show that COVID cases are up 7%. What's behind this holiday spike? And could masking also help with some of these other triple-demic concerns we're talking about, like RSV, flu, et cetera?
Good morning, Dasha. You know, what's behind this holiday spike? I don't think it's that shocking to most people that, COVID cases are starting to rise, especially as we're traveling for the holidays. And, we've seen that in colder weathers, as people start to gather indoors, we tend to see more spread of the virus. And, could mask mandates slow this down? I think it's reasonable to assume that if everybody wore a high-quality mask, meaning an N95 or a KN95, you would see reduction in spread of viruses. The problem is, if you have a mask mandate, people actually have to follow the rules and actually have to wear the masks. And I think the appetite for that really isn't there right now. So what you're going to start to see is a lot of people say we strongly recommend masks, but avoid the word mandate to avoid getting caught in those political crossfires right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to ask you about another concern. It seems like we're dealing with a lot of these this holiday season. Strep A, according to the UK Health Security Agency, it shows at least 94 people, including 24 children, have died from complications caused by the illness. Walk us through, what is Strep A? How can you tell just a regular sore throat from this infection? And should people here in the U.S. be concerned?
With flu, with RSV, with COVID, and now Strep A, I really do feel for parents out there. It sounds very concerning. But, let's talk about the difference between Strep A, which is strep throat, and a sore throat from a regular cold. And, the big difference you see is with a cold, you'll get a runny nose, you'll get congestion, cough, those kind of things. With the strep throat, you have really, it hurts a lot to swallow, and you also get a high fever, and you may have swollen lymph nodes, which are glands in your neck. So those are the kind of symptoms you want to watch out for. But the good news is, if you are alert, there's no reason to be, panicked or concerned about this. It is something that is very treatable with antibiotics like penicillin or amoxicillin.
Just watch out. It doesn't have some of those other cold symptoms that you typically see. It's
exactly.
The sore throat, the fever. Okay, great. And then I do want to talk to you about this story we've been covering for a couple of weeks, it feels now. When you go to the drugstore, a lot of people are not seeing, especially those children's pain relief medications. Some pharmacies are even limiting the amount of medications that folks can buy. What's going on here? What can parents with a sick child at home, what can they do?
Yeah, so I understand a lot of the concern. We're seeing it pop up in different regions of the country where people are even, taking to social media and sharing photos of the pharmacy shelves without medications. The most important thing I think to know here is that if you have a fever, you don't always need to treat it. Most children can actually, if they're eating on their own, they're doing their normal activities, and they have a fever, you don't need to run and throw medications at them. There are some exceptions, especially babies under the age of 3 months. You want to call your doctor right away if they have a fever. But for most people, you can try things like ice packs, stay hydrated with fluids, and if they have things like a cough or a lot of mucus in their nose, you can try a saline or a salt rinse in their nose and other medications while we wait for those fever medications to come back.
It feels like the headline you're giving here for parents, which can be hard advice to follow, is don't panic, take the necessary precautions, look out for some of those symptoms you mentioned. It's gonna be okay.
Stay alert, not alarmed.
All right, thank you so much, Doc. We're back now with the latest on the war in Ukraine. Now more than 10 months after Russia began to invade the country, Ukraine's foreign minister tells the Associated Press he wants to have a peace summit by the end of February, which would coincide with the one-year anniversary of the conflict. For the latest, we're joined by NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley in Kiev and Colonel Jack Jacobs. Colonel Jacobs is an NBC News military analyst and a Medal of Honor recipient. Good morning to you both. Matt, let's start with you. What's the latest on the ground where you are in Kiev, and what more can you tell us about this potential peace summit?
Well, this peace summit that we're talking about, really, Dasha, it looks like kind of posturing on both sides, because we've heard, President Putin, even a couple of days ago, before we heard this latest offer from Dmitry Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, President Putin said that he was willing to negotiate. Now, that's not the first time he's said that, but he said, if you really look at the substance of his speech, and this made headlines across the world, he really was talking not so much about negotiating with Ukraine, but negotiating with the West. And that's kind of actually consistent with Vladimir Putin's line since the beginning of this conflict. He believes that Ukraine is just a puppet, just part of a Western conspiracy trying to take down Russia. Volodymyr Zelensky is a little more than a stooge for Washington. So when he says he wants to offer to negotiate, he really means with the West, and that is essentially a substance-free offer. Now, this offer from Dmitry Kuleba that we just heard yesterday, this is also a little bit strange, and I had a little bit of a hard time figuring out exactly what he meant, because he's talking about a peace conference at the United Nations that would be sort of negotiated or sort of chaired by the head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. It doesn't sound like Russia would even be invited, so it's hard to see either of these offers ever getting off the ground. Dasha?
Yeah, and to Matt's point, Colonel Jacobs, about posturing, help us parse through this. Ukraine's foreign minister tells the AP Russia could be invited to a potential summit only if it faced a war crimes tribunal first. What do you make of that, and how likely is any of this to happen?
Well, it's very unlikely, and it's probably not going to happen. Both sides have settled down with the assumption that ultimately there might be a negotiated settlement, perhaps to give part of the Donbass to Russia in exchange for Russia stopping its aggression. But that's long, long into the future. Both sides are committed to carrying on. Don't forget that Zelensky just got another commitment from the West to provide new and more modern weapons, particularly anti-missile and anti-aircraft weapons. And they are gearing up perhaps to conduct an attack to Russian positions on the eastern side of the river, perhaps in the springtime. For their part, the Russians will continue to bombard Ukraine. Both sides have settled in, I think, for the long haul, Dasha.
Yeah, we're not seeing any slowing, at least from our vantage point. Matt, Russian President Vladimir Putin claims his country is ready to end the war despite the continued attacks. We know Ukraine is getting more military aid, as the colonel said, from the U.S. Is there any sign of the war possibly nearing an end at this point? And how are folks on the ground that you're talking to feeling about this? Do they see an end in sight?
No, and as the colonel mentioned, both sides are determined to carry on. The fact of the matter is, Dasha, both these sides benefit from posturing because at the end of the day, this is a battle for public opinion, for global opinion, because this war has felt aftershocks all throughout the world when it comes to everything from wheat prices to electricity to inflation. They want to be seen, both sides, as the one that is standing up to the greater power, in Putin's case, standing up to an imperious West, and in Ukraine's part, a hostile invader that has killed thousands, tens of thousands of civilians. So for both sides, posturing helps. Now, whether or not this will actually come to fruition depends more on what happens on the battlefield and less on what happens diplomatically and the sort of noises we're hearing from both capitals. And the fact is, on the battlefield, Ukraine still has the upper hand, but it hasn't made any real advances on the ground for the better part of the past 2 months. Now, we have started to hear stuff about Bakhmut. We heard that from President Vladimir Zelensky when he was in Washington, that there were advances on the battlefield that he was just there in Bakhmut. And we've heard that there were advances, almost imperceptibly small advances by the Russians against the Ukrainians around Bakhmut. But we're also hearing from Ukrainian officials that they are possibly within striking distance of taking the city of Kreminna, which is just a little bit north of Bakhmut. Both of these cities sort of in the Donbass region, or just on the western outskirts of the Donbass region. So there have been just such tiny minutia movements over the past couple of weeks, and that just makes it seem as though this fight could go on for months or even years more. Dasha?
Yep. Both sides seem pretty entrenched there. Matt Bradley, Colonel Jack Jacobs, thanks so much to you both. Now to some international news. South Korea has issued an apology for failing to shoot down North Korean drones. NBC News foreign correspondent Ali Arouzi joins us now for this and more. Good morning, Ali.
Good morning, Dasha. That's right. South Korea's military has apologized for failing to shoot down 5 North Korean drones that flew into South Korean airspace. One of the drones flew very close to the capital, Seoul. The 5 drones made it back despite a 5-hour pursuit into North Korea. South Korea has pledged to secure anti-drone strike capability. Saber rattling continues to escalate between Serbia and Kosovo as the Serbian army says it is at its highest level of combat readiness. Tension increased after some media claims in Serbia that Pristina is preparing an attack on ethnic Serb areas in North Kosovo. The government in Pristina has not addressed the allegations. And as of January the 8th, China will scrap its quarantine for travelers, marking the first major shift in the country's zero COVID policy. After 3 years of strict controls, China will reopen its borders to those with a work or study visa, or people simply seeking to visit family members. And those are your international headlines, Dasha.
Allie, thank you so much. Turning now to new details in the controversy surrounding newly elected New York Congressman George Santos. In a recent interview, Santos admitted that he misrepresented several parts of his resume while on the campaign trail. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda has more on the fallout.
In an Iran nuclear
Long Island Representative-elect George Santos, a Republican under fire for lying about his past, now coming clean in an interview with WABC Radio.
A lot of people overstate in their resumes or twist a little bit or ingratiate themselves. I'm not saying I'm not guilty of that.
And telling the New York Post, my sins here are embellishing my resume. I'm sorry. The embellishments, a confirmation of reporting from the New York Times that Santos had not graduated from college or worked directly at two major Wall Street firms, Citigroup and Goldman Sachs. But Santos maintained his innocence on other fronts.
I'm not a criminal who defrauded the entire country and made up this fictional character and ran for Congress.
Santos denied reporting from the New York Times that he has unresolved criminal charges in Brazil. Questions were also raised about a tax-exempt animal rescue group Santos claims to run. According to the Times, the IRS has no record of a charity by its name, and how he managed to lend $700,000 to his congressional campaign, to which he responded,
"That is the money that I paid myself through my company."
Santos also addressed claims about his personal life, telling the New York Post, "I never claimed to be Jewish," while his campaign website said that his maternal family was Jewish and his grandparents escaped Jewish persecution.
This campaign was never about me. It was always about the people.
These questions and revelations coming just weeks after pulling off an upset victory in the midterms.
I've been around a long time. I mean, a lot of people know me. They know who I am.
Santos shows no signs of offering his resignation amid increasingly louder calls to resign.
He has spat in the face of every resident in the 3rd Congressional District and said that facts do not matter.
He's expected to be sworn in before Congress next month.
At the end of the day, I campaigned on issues, and I campaigned to deliver results. Those promises still stand.
Our thanks to Emily Ikeda for that report. We should note that NBC News has attempted to reach out to George Santos, but we've not yet received a response. Nassau County GOP spokesperson Mike Deary says the party will not have a statement until later today. Welcome back. This morning, the bitter cold is damaging infrastructure across the South, bursting pipes both big and small, and in some cases, entire cities are now without safe water. Cities like Jackson, Mississippi. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander has more.
Down south, where temperatures rarely dip this low, the bitter cold is taking a toll on the water system. In city after city, pipes snapping, leaking, and leaving thousands without running water. At South Carolina's largest food bank, a burst pipe threatened the food supply for thousands. Water forced Atlanta's busy airport to temporarily close a gate. The issue spanned from Memphis to Selma to Jackson, Mississippi, a city long plagued by water problems. There, officials issued a boil water alert on Christmas Day.
Were you able to cook Christmas dinner?
No. It was very disappointing.
Katisha Bragg has already been without water 5 times this year. That means spending her days waiting in line for cases of bottled water.
It takes a bottle of water just, to wash your hands. So then brush your teeth. That's another bottle of water.
So those cases are gone in a day, and then you have to go back and do the whole thing all over again the next day?
Yes.
In a statement today, city officials say we continue to struggle to return pressure, citing significant leaks in the system that we have yet to identify. Jackson's water crisis stretches back decades. Over the summer, residents spent months without clean water. Last week, Congress approved $600 million to help Jackson's infrastructure, though some leaders say a meaningful fix will take years. Katisha says she is willing to wait.
So I'm hopeful. It's frustrating. but this is where I choose to be.
Blaine Alexander, NBC News.
The residents of Jackson there have been through so much. It's now time for our weekly mental health check-in. The new year is just around the corner, which of course means resolution lists are being made. We'll have more on top priorities for Generation Z. Plus, more women say they need more mental health support, but new studies show they aren't getting it. Let's bring in clinical psychologist Dr. Jennifer Hartstein for more on these headlines. Dr. Hartstein, good morning. So the new year, less than a week away, which means most people are probably writing up their lists of resolutions for 2023. Now, a top priority for Generation Z is mental health. That's according to a Forbes study. So what's causing this shift for younger generations as opposed to some of their parents who are probably more focused on things like losing a few pounds? And is it just as important as physical health seen in some of those older generations?
Absolutely. I think we have a shift because the younger generations are just talking about this more and how wonderful that is, right? That they're accessing that for themselves more. They're talking about it more. Social media talks about it more for them. So it's just normalized across their age group. And they really look at mental health, to your point, Dasha, the mental health and the physical health being the same. You really can't have one without the other. So if we're looking at mental health as something we all have and we need to work on, the other things will come with it. You know, they kind of lean into each other. So a good shift there is a good shift.
I also want to talk to you about a new study from the Kaiser Family Foundation, which found more women are struggling to access mental health services despite reporting a growing need for that help. What are some of the barriers for women to get help, and what happens if they aren't able to find it? What can we do?
It's really challenging. You know, 40% of women are saying they want to get it. They can't. I mean, women across the board are saying they want to get it. 40% can't get it or aren't getting it. And one of the bigger barriers are access. Supply and demand is not, we can't meet the need, scheduling issues, a lot of just big kinds of things that then causes us, if I'm already kind of struggling, it causes me to give up maybe and not want to pursue that and fight through it because there are often long wait lists, really challenging times to get the support. And what that means is women are a really important part of our workforce. And if they're not functioning to their capacity, we're losing really important workspace for them, and we're losing good employees. So we need to figure out how to support women better so that they can get the help that they need and they can bring to the society what we know they can bring and how we can support them there.
Absolutely. And finally, doctor, experts say this is the best time of the year to take a break from social media. So important for so many of us. Why is that such a significant piece of advice, especially during the holidays? And are there any tips on how to get started for those of us who may have a hard time with that?
Most of us will have a hard time with that, right? We are very connected to our devices. I am too. It's sitting right next to me. And I think what we have to think about is, what is it doing for us? It doesn't really help us. We know that social media can impact us in some negative ways. It makes us more depressed, can make us more anxious. And at this time of year, we're busy looking at what everybody else is doing during the holidays. Are they on vacation? Did they get a splashy gift? And we're constantly comparing ourselves to what someone else curates online. Now, listen, social media does have some good sides to it, but the real challenge is where it brings us down and it actually makes us more committed. So where do we start, right? Cut back a little bit every day, or maybe limit yourself to 30 minutes a day, because taking a week off for many of us feels like we're losing an arm. We don't want to do that. Maybe ask for help from other people. Say, hey, I'm trying to cut back on my social media use. Can you text me instead of Instagram message me? Or can you remind me when I'm on my phone? Maybe even delete your apps from your phone so that you can't have access all the time. And just notice how you feel. Take a day off. And then when you go back on, how do you feel? If you don't feel good, stay off. If it's not giving to you, maybe the resolution and the goal is just letting go of the things that aren't giving back to you at this time.
Such helpful advice as I sit here surrounded by my devices. Dr. Jennifer Hartstein, thank you so much. And we're back with that Mega Millions jackpot, now more than $500 million. The next drawing is set for tonight at 11 p.m. NBC News senior national correspondent Carrie Sanders joins us now with more on that. Carrie, good morning.
Well, good morning. I'm inside the Wawa convenience store down here in South Florida on an unusually chilly morning, and not Steve Kornacki at the big board, but I'm going to touch the balls and see what happens here. I have one for you and one for me because it's $2, Dasha. So we can only hope that somehow, remarkably, not only the chances of buying a live ticket on TV was going to be the winning ticket, but that we're even going to get this thing to work. So here we go. I push it. There comes our ticket. Here we go. And whoever wins, well, the amount of money in this jackpot, as you noted, is more than $500 million. We're talking about $565 billion. Boy, would that make for an amazing new year.
Carrie, I'm amazed you figured out how to operate that thing. I can never quite do it right. I always get too many tickets or not the right tickets, but I'm crossing my fingers for you.
With just days to go until the new year, someone could have quite the reason to celebrate.
Thank you, sir. Do you have Apple Pay?
Tonight's Mega Millions jackpot has reached an eye-watering $565 million, the biggest ever seen in the last week of the year.
Would you like Mega Million?
Yeah. Yes, please. Two.
If someone matches all 6 numbers, it would be the 6th largest prize in the game's 20-year history.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Mega Millions has served up only 11 winning jackpots of $500 million or more. The last big prize won in October, when winners in California and Florida shared a $502 million prize. This year, nationwide excitement for lotto games hit a fever pitch, and for good reason. A single Mega Millions ticket purchased in a Chicago suburb won a record $1.337 billion. The 2 winners remaining anonymous and opting for a lump sum payment of more than $780 million.
This is Powerball.
And just last month, after 40 straight winless drawings, a winning Powerball ticket was sold just outside Los Angeles, worth a historic $2.04 billion. The winner of that mega jackpot has yet to come forward to claim the winnings.
It is the billion-dollar question, the $2 billion question. We don't know who won.
California law requires their name to eventually be made public, though the winner has 1 calendar year from the draw to come forward. If it feels like Powerball and Mega Million pots have gotten bigger lately, it's because they have. The organizers behind both lotteries have added more number combinations, making it harder to hit. And rising interest rates also mean higher total payouts. Tonight, a few bucks will get you a shot at life-changing winnings that could make ringing in 2023 a lot sweeter.
Who contributed to that $2 billion victory? Well, I guess I know somebody who had a bunch of tickets that were losers. But Dasha, here's the thing. If you don't see me next year, maybe I won. Who knows?
I was going to say that's how we know who won, who doesn't show up to work tomorrow. Carrie, thank you so much. All right, more money news now. Steep discounts are drawing spend-happy consumers, and that's got retail sales rising. CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us now with that and other financial headlines. Good morning, Silvana.
Dasha, good morning to you. Well, retail sales rose 7.6% during the holiday season as steep discounts lured consumers hungry for deals. MasterCard says that's lower than the 8.5% sales growth last year, but higher than the 7.1% it forecast back in September. Spending was fueled by restaurants and clothing. MasterCard says online sales jumped more than 10%, and in-person spending was up about 7%. Some members of the Biden administration are pushing for a sale of TikTok's U.S. operations to ensure China can't use the app to spy on Americans. The Wall Street Journal reports a sale was raised in discussions by the Committee on Foreign Investment. That's a regulatory group with members from several government agencies. TikTok is owned by Chinese conglomerate ByteDance. The app has already been banned from being used on devices issued by the federal and some state governments. restaurants are staffing up again. The Wall Street Journal says the industry has erased most of the job losses from the pandemic. Last month, the Labor Department reporting restaurants and bars nearly doubled the number of employees working at pandemic lows in April 2020, adding 62,000 jobs. Restaurant owners and workers cite several factors, including higher pay, better working conditions, and fewer opportunities elsewhere. Dasha.
Savannah, thank you so much.
You got it.
And as the year comes to a close, we want to take a closer look at some of the top economic stories that made headlines this year, from inflation to crypto. How will your money be impacted in 2023? For more, we're joined by the editor-in-chief at Investopedia, Caleb Silver. Thank you so much for being here, Caleb. This year has seen a whirlwind of economic headlines full of extremes, and the one issue that touched everybody was inflation. 2022 saw the highest levels of price increases across the board in 40 years. Remind us, how did we end up here?
Yeah, great question. Happy holidays. Great to be with you. What is inflation? It's an imbalance between supply and demand coming out of the lockdowns, coming out of the economic shutdowns in 2020. We were spending, revenge spending on goods in 2021. You saw a huge spike in food and energy prices. Russia's invasion of Ukraine had something to do with that, but we started moving around again. And then that shift went from spending on goods to spending on services like travel. We had massive inflation there. So that's how you get inflation. You get us spending again, and you get a supply chain that wasn't quite ready for it, and then a shift in spending to services, and that's where we are now. Inflation may have peaked a couple months ago, but it has been the biggest story of the last year, maybe of the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. We've all been watching that tick up very, very closely, Caleb. 2022 was also a wild year for the markets, both in the traditional sector, and we also had some crazy stuff going on with cryptocurrency. Take us through some of the numbers and your big highlights for the year.
Yeah, any one of these would be a massive story in any year, but we had several at the same time. So it was a terrible year. I think the worst in history for the 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. That's usually the balance that advisors recommend as we get older. Terrible year for both the bond and the stock market. The stock market, of course, in a bear market, down still about 19.5%. But the 401k balances went down about 20%, from 126,000 to 97,000. The savings rate, we were saving so much money in 2020 when we couldn't spend, that dropped precipitously. And then the 30-year fixed mortgage rate for buying a home, that doubled in 1 year. You saw the real cool down in the housing market. The housing market is in a deep freeze, and so is crypto. And we also saw, with rising interest rates to battle inflation, super high APRs on credit cards, the highest on record right now. Credit card balances are swelling, plus the collapse of crypto into the crypto winter and the bust of some of these exchanges. What a massive year in headlines for the economy and the capital market.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking of that, we had to go through so much this year on the economic front. Taking a step back, how do you think 2022 will be remembered economically in the history books?
Yeah, we have a technical term for that. It's called a hot mess, and that's exactly how we're going to remember it. 40-year high in inflation, the fastest rise in interest rates we've ever seen, a deep bear market for the stock market and for cryptocurrencies. Any one of these stories, again, would have been massive stories. And then the real cool down in the housing market. Prices remain high, but we've had slowing sales every month this year. So this has been one of those wild years in the economy we won't soon forget. Meanwhile, the labor market remains very strong going into 2023. That's a big question mark. As the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, are we going to have higher unemployment in 2023? That's kind of what the central bank wants.
Yeah, hot mess, the scientific term for this year. Caleb, thank you so much. And now to a spotlight on some people who really left their mark on 2022. This morning, we're introducing you to Darren Harrison, a man who is now known for landing a plane without any flying experience. You heard it right. After his pilot became unconscious, our very own Joe Fryer has his miraculous story.
I've got a serious situation here. My pilot has gone incoherent.
It was a flight home that quickly became a life-or-death situation for Darren Harrison last May. The pilot of the small plane suffered a catastrophic cardiac event, leading Darren to jump into action.
The plane is in a nosedive, essentially.
Correct. Yes. And at that point, I knew if I didn't react that we would die. And so I reached over his body, because he's at this point unresponsive, and I grabbed the controls of the airplane and slowly started to pull back on the stick and turn.
How did you know how to do that?
Just common sense, I guess, being on airplanes.
That's a miracle right there.
That's the scariest part of the whole story.
A story that was far from over. Darren, who had no flying experience and no GPS, still had to land the plane.
Did it ever cross your mind that you wouldn't try?
No.
With the help of an air traffic controller on the ground, Darren landed safely. His first call to his wife, Brittany, who is pregnant with their first child.
Did you think about your little girl?
It's one of the first things that went through my mind. I can't die today. I got a baby on the way.
A new life that arrived just 3 months after Darren defied death.
Mary Margaret came into the world.
Darren and Brittany say they're cherishing every second they have together as a family of 3.
She's a dream. She's everything that we ever hoped that she could be and more.
As for the plane's pilot, Darren says he has made a full recovery and is flying again.
He is doing fantastic, like it never even happened.
But his own return to the sky was a bit nerve-wracking.
I went on, hey, it's no big deal. You know, nothing's going to happen. It's a commercial flight. There was 2 instances that were very vivid where it kind of shook me up a little bit.
A reminder of that near-death experience that has given him a new appreciation for life, his family, and his friends.
Every time I see a friend of mine, I always give hugs now. Handshakes are gone. I always do hugs. So I'm just thankful to see people and thankful to have those friends and just thankful to be alive.
Wow. Our thanks to Joe for that incredible story. And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.